Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sports Time HQ. I am your host, Fernando, and today I am joined by two very great people. I am joined by Keith, my co-host, and I'm joined by Pro Football Network senior analyst, fantasy analyst, Eric Moody. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good, Fernando. Thanks for having us on as usual. Looking forward to the show.
Yeah, no, things are going up pretty good in my world. Fully caffeinated, ready to rock and roll. Always a good time to talk about fantasy football. I can do it all day.
Of course, we love fantasy football. Eric, what are you guys doing so far, if you're able to say it, in Pro Football Network?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I guess for those that don't know, Pro Football Network has really like all the latest like NFL news, rumors, plus analysis on fantasy football, betting, the NFL draft, and really so much more. As a senior fantasy analyst with PFN, I create all sorts of content, whether it's audio, written, video content, and also do a lot of rankings as well, redraft, Superflex, IDP, and dynasty rankings. So I essentially do it all.
All right. And Keith, I know you just published one of our articles on sportstimehq.com. Do you want to talk about that article real quick?
Yeah, so the article recently was the 2022 free agents. So interesting next year. A lot of good players, a lot of talent that are going to be out there on the market. So it's going to be interesting to see where they land. I'd imagine most of the big names will remain on the same teams, but definitely interesting going forward and seeing where some of them land.
Yeah, it'll be great to see where some big names go next year. But we're going to start off. We're going to talk about breakouts, bust, and sleeper candidates, fantasy football candidates for the 2021 NFL season. We're going to start out with breakout candidates. And Keith, we'll start with you. You can name either both your breakout candidates or you can name one at a time. Don't matter.
No pressure, so no pressure. I'll go one at a time, so I'll start off with a running back. I'll go breakout candidate. So Najee Harris at Pittsburgh Steelers. I think this guy has all the potential, to be a great player. Love the landing spot. Love the talent. I think we all know that, the Steelers' offensive line is not great, but I think he's going to get all the volume in the world just to be great. It's fantasy football. Touches are key. It's like wide receiver, you want the targets. Running back, you want the touches. I think he'll just get so many touches that it's just going to be so valuable for fantasy football. I think it could easily be, you could have the top 5 in touches or maybe the most touches of a running back, next season or this season, sorry. So, yeah, I think he's got all the talent. And I really hope he breaks out this year.
I love that pick. Eric?
So, yeah, go ahead.
Oh. I was going to say we can go one at a time. I thought you were going one at a time. That's why.
Yeah.
That's fine. I can dive in. Yeah, if you want me to.
Yeah.
All right. No, I'll do it. But no, I agree with Keith. I'll get into my candidate too on like with Najee Harris. Huge Alabama fan. Really excited to see what he brings to the table at the next level. He can essentially do it all. Like he excels like at yards after contact. Making defenders miss. He's a plug and play. 3-down back. One thing that's interesting with Harris is that Like he totaled just a little bit under 3,900 yards rushing, at Alabama, which ranks first, in Crimson Tide history. But one other breakout candidate that I would like to talk about, hey, we'll still stay with the running back position, is I would say Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think that's a guy that got a lot of hype going into last season. Everyone kind of expected the world, hey, the top running back, how he's going to do it, that Chiefs offense. And so, he had his moments, but some things didn't come together. Ultimately, he didn't end up meeting expectations in 2020. So one thing that was interesting, though, when you look at him, he averaged a little bit over 18 opportunities per game. He still had 4 RB1 finishes in spite of having – you gentlemen remember this, like the bad luck at the goal line. You're just like, if I had hair, I would be pulling it out. I was like, oh, he cannot get in. And he also dealt with some injuries too, right? But going into this year, he doesn't have Damian Williams that's there. He's with the Bears. He's going to terrorize David Montgomery. But that's a whole nother conversation. But this offense is still explosive. You got Travis Kelce, you got Tyreek Hill, you got Patrick Mahomes, so quarterback who hasn't even – I think he's just scratching the surface, really, of what he's capable of when you look at his age and his statistical body of work so far. But even if Edwards-Helaire does what he just did last year, he's still going to flirt with, low-end RB1 numbers. But I believe, whenever you have a rookie, and especially the rookies last year who had, we'll just say, a unique kind of draft experience and lead into the NFL just with COVID, and he's going to have a normal offseason this year. So I expect a lot from Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I think he's a candidate to really, I would say, outproduce, exceed his average draft position.
Yeah, no, I love that pick. I actually was thinking of adding him as my breakout candidate because so many people were just so high on him last season in rookie drafts and dynasty leagues. They were just drafting him at 1.01. Yeah. And it's because he was the first running back off the board in last year's draft. And we saw how his potential went. He obviously did not break out. And I agree with you. I think it's a solid breakout year for him.
Yeah.
I also agree. I just wanted to ask Eric there. Do you not think that the Chiefs kind of, Patrick Mahomes wants to throw the ball. That's what they want to do. Do you think that kind of, stops Clyde getting to where he wants to get them, numbers getting into the, top 5, top 6 at the running back position?
Yeah, I would say one thing that gives me, a little bit more optimism is that with some of the reports that he's going to be used more as a receiver, out of the backfield. So I think that's going to elevate his opportunity share, with his ceiling. And plus it's going to make him essentially be always involved, whether they're, they're leading the game, trying to nurse a lead, or if they're playing from behind. And so that's something I'm really excited about. And I know what people may be thinking is that not all the time, coach speak actually comes to fruition, but just given his body of work, at LSU before getting into the league, I'd be really surprised if they don't involve him more as a receiver out of the backfield.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So I'm actually going to go to wide receiver here instead of running backs. I'm not going to follow you guys, but I do have another running back that will be a breakout, but I want to be different. I'm going to go with Michael Gallup from the Dallas Cowboys. In 2019, he had 66 receptions, 1,107 yards, 6 touchdowns, and he ranked 22 in PPR leagues. Last season, he ranked 38 in PPR leagues, and he still had 59 receptions, 843 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And we had an injured Dak Prescott that got injured early in the season. And you know what? Michael Gallup still produced. If Dak Prescott is healthy, he is able to give so much more progression to Michael Gallup. And I really think that he's going to be a big breakout player because he's already been impressing coaches in the offseason, and they talked about how he could be getting more reps in the slot.
I'll chime in. Yeah, no, I love Gallup because if you look at all those Dallas wide receivers, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Gallup's going to be the least expensive, when you look at ADP. But just given the state of the Cowboys defense, I know they tried to aggressively improve their defense this offseason, but it's still going to be an abomination. And so they're going to have to lean heavily on that offense. And so I think it's in the realm of possibility that all 3 Cowboys receivers can get, 1,000 yards. And I think it's a really high probability too that all 3 of them can exceed 100 targets. So no, I like it. I'm really high on Gallup too.
I think this is where I probably go against.
Wow.
Well, I understand completely where he's coming from, but I just think there's too many mouths to feed. I think he's definitely a guy. I have him in dynasty leagues. And I like him in dynasty leagues. I don't think he's going to be, a Cowboy next year, or and he could flourish on another team. He could be the number one, I don't know, number two on another team. But I just think there's too many mouths to feed. I get it, Dak back fully healthy, but you got Zeke out of backfields. You got Amari Cooper. You got the tight ends there as well as CD. I just think there's too many mouths. So we'll see.
That's a fair point. I could see it, but I think with so many mouths to feed this year, and with Andy Dalton as a quarterback last year, I think with Dak there, it's just gonna be more electrifying. Can't even say the word. And I just think that's why Dak is going to really help Michael Gallup grow.
Yeah.
But Keith, we can go back to you for your second one.
So this one, I think this one's going to cause, I don't think people like this one, because I've definitely seen this quarterback as a bust. But I'm going with Daniel Jones to break out. And my reason is he has no choice. I think his career is in trouble if he doesn't. You're going to have Saquon back. They got in Kenny Golladay. They have Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton. They got Kadarius Toney. They're giving him the weapons. The defense, it's not the best, but it's not the worst. I think they'll be on the field. He needs to play a lot better. He needs to have his best season in the NFL today. And talking from a fantasy point of view, in any of the drafts I was doing for Dynasty, he was falling so far down. He was cheap. I was getting him as a second QB, third QB. The value was so good. Now, redraft, I'm not too sure. I think you probably, if you're in a QB league or a super flex, you'll get him later on, all right. And one QB, don't trust him. But I just think for someone that has to break out, it's Daniel Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I actually traded for him in one of my leagues. I actually got rid of Jared Goff, who I think could be a bust this year. And I actually got Daniel Jones for the upside. We traded 2021 first. He got a 2021 first. I got a 2022 first. But I also got a second and a third, and I gave him a fourth. So I think I kind of got, it's kind of a breaker year kind of with Daniel Jones. And I agree, but I think, I don't know, with the deal I had, I think I'm basically not losing anything. If Daniel Jones ends up not being the guy, then that's okay. But yeah, Daniel Jones needs to break out this year. This is his year. They gave him everything that they could for him to be better. So I would be really shocked if he doesn't break out.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that, just with the weapons that they've surrounded him with. And to Keith's point, I'm like, you get Saquon back. Spend a little bit more time like in Wakanda to heal up. I know it wasn't able to help him from a previous season, but he should be ready to go. I digress, with the Marvel commentary. But I think something else I do want to touch on before diving into my other candidate would be, I'm like, the impact that Kenny Golladay has. And I know some people are like, Kenny Golladay, it could help him. But I think one area where it helps Jones quite a bit is in that area of like contested catches. He's got a receiver for where if he just puts the ball like in striking distance, Golladay will come down with it, and especially helps him in like the kind of short to intermediate area of the field. That's where Golladay does a lot of his damage. And he's not a separator. He's not going to fly past someone. But with those types of balls, if they're positioned the right way, I think that could help out Jones tremendously. So no, I agree with Keith. Once again, we'll see if we break the trend, Keith. But I do like Daniel Jones quite a bit. I've been speaking highly of him over the past couple of months.
That's good.
Yeah. So okay, let me think. So we're still on breakout candidates, and then I know we'll end up getting to sleepers. I would say Terry McLaurin. That's one guy that really comes to mind, and I'll kind of tell you why for where I think he can even exceed like everyone's like expectations. Because you look at McLaurin, I'm like his statistical body of work. He finishes a wide receiver 2 or better in like 45% of his games, like in PPR formats. Played through high ankle sprain, last season, was still able to produce. But here's the reality. I'm like, it's been a dumpster fire when you look at like his quarterback situation that he's had like over these last 2 seasons, and he's still been able to produce. And so, he's been the guy. You get lots of defensive attention. They're like, oh, this Washington team doesn't really have any weapons outside of Terry McLaurin. And so he's still been able to produce. Now you look at this season, like he's got Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's year in and year out, criminally underrated, but he's a viable quarterback for McLaurin. So you've got him. You got his college buddy from Ohio State, Curtis Samuel, coming in. Free agent acquisition. Finally gives the Washington football team like a legitimate number 2 wide receiver. And so you also have the emergence of Antonio Gibson, the running back. They're going to use him quite a bit as a receiver out of the backfield. And so you got to pick your poison if you're a defensive coordinator, because like I've got all these guys I've got to defend. And so I think that bodes very well for a guy like McLaurin. And I'll go ahead and say it here. It's like you're looking at a guy for where he's relatively inexpensive at his ADP, but you're getting someone that can give you wide receiver 1 upside once the dust settles on 2021.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to disagree with you. I don't think he's going to break out this year. My reasoning is it's like the Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think there's too many mouths to feed. You got Curtis Samuel there, Terry McLaurin, then you added De'Ami Brown, and then you got Logan Thomas too there, and then you got Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissick, who was a pass down back. I just think it's more. There's so many more mouths to feed there than like the Chiefs. That's why I agree with the CEH breakout. But I just don't see Terry McLaurin breaking out or even doing better than what he has been.
Yeah.
I think me and Eric are still on trend here, I'm afraid. We're doing good. I just think he's too talented. I agree, Fernando, with the, there's lots of mouths there, but I think his talent is just at a different level. And putting Fitzmagic in there, competent quarterback, that's all he needs in my books. He could touch the wide receiver 1 numbers, and nobody really be surprised in my opinion, but I just think he's on a different level talent wise.
I see your points. I see both your points, but I definitely am not going to be on that trend. That's for sure. So I'll go with my breakout, and this was actually tough to decide whether it should be David Johnson or Philip Lindsay because of the running back committee that they have in Houston. I actually decided to go with Philip Lindsay here, and that's because David Johnson, he's old. He's 29 years old. That's usually how far it really takes for a running back to really decrease in value. And other than 2016, that was his only 1,000-yard season that he had ever in football history. And fantasy outlook, he hasn't been top 10 since 2018. He was 21st last year. And it's crazy to see that in the last 4 years, he had 15 total touchdowns. In 2016, he had 16 total touchdowns. So in the last 4 years, he hasn't even hit his 1 season of 16 touchdowns. So I just don't see him being that top man in Houston. And if you look at Philip Lindsay, his first 2 years, 1,000-yard rushing seasons, both 1,000-yard, top 20 in PPR leagues, both years. Last year, he finished 66th. He battled through injuries. He's got a new team. I think this is the year he becomes that true starter and David Johnson goes down to a backup.
Yeah. I really like that because I know in one article, that I put out at Pro Football Network about, top, 0 running back candidates if you're implementing that strategy. Like Philip Lindsay, was one of those guys. I'm like, it's easy to overlook with how dominant he was during his first 2 seasons. I'm like, this is a guy that accumulated, I think it was a little bit over 2,000 yards, in 16 touchdowns in 31 games. Last season, his snaps dropped considerably in those 11 games. I think he rushed for a little bit over 500 yards and only 1 touchdown. But he's got to change of scenery. He's down there in Houston, and it's hey, the opportunity is right for the taking. To your point, Fernando, you got David Johnson, waning athleticism. You got 31-year-old, I believe, Mark Ingram. And so that's a training camp battle that I'm really, really intrigued by to see what happens there. So love it.
I like that call too. I was always a big Philip Lindsay fan. I was just looking for him just to get that role where he'd be the RB1 on the team. That way he was always splitting time, or Melvin Gordon comes over, stuff like that. He always had the talent. So I think he'd be the one that gets the main role there in Houston.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I luckily had you guys step onto my trend now this time.
Walking on the wild side.
All right. So we named all our breakout candidates. Keith, you went with Najee Harris and Jalen Jones. Eric, you went with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Terry McLaurin, and I went with Michael Gallup, and as well, Philip Lindsay. Now it's time to move on to our bust candidates. And Eric, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Bust candidates.
All right. So we're thinking about bust. Well, I'll tell you one name when you mentioned that we were talking about this, like immediately entered my mind, and that is the Las Vegas Raiders' very own Josh Jacobs. And I'm like, Josh Jacobs has been like a monster, like his first, 2 seasons, out of Bama. But huge Bama fans. Any of their players like to see them do well, like in the in the NFL. But one thing with I guess with Jacobs that concerns me is Kenyon Drake. Yeah. Once they made that signing, I was sitting there like scratching my head. It's like what are we doing here? And I'm like, the guy's a problem, and I'll tell you why. I'm like, a 2-year, $11 million contract with every single dollar and cents guaranteed, where it's just like they're going to pay him. Mm-hmm. If I'm a businessman, I'm like, you want to get a return on your investment. So he is going to have a role like in this backfield. And I'm like, the Raiders last year, I'm like, they averaged like the 11th most rushing attempts per game. Drake is obviously no slouch. I think a lot of people that are watching or listening to this are very familiar with his body of work. Like the guy totaled, 3,266 total yards and 27 touchdowns, like in 45 games over his last 45 games. Finishes like as an RB2 or better in PPR formats in 54% of his games over that same time period. So he will have a role. And if you just look at their ADP, if I have a choice, it's like Josh Jacobs, who's definitely much, a much higher ADP than a guy like Kenyon Drake, who may or may not get used as a receiver out of the backfield. I know that's been another area of opportunity for him. But then you got a guy like Kenyon Drake that they brought in, fully guaranteed contract. I just rather take Drake later if I want a piece of that Raiders running game. So Josh Jacobs, bust.
Yeah, a little piece of the pie. I like Kenyon Drake as a pick for a breakout, to be honest, because of, like you said, a fully guaranteed. Why are you going to pay a backup running back fully guaranteed money?
Yeah, not use him.
Exactly. Right. So it only makes a sense.
Yeah, I think I traded for Josh Jacobs. I want to say 2 days before Kenyon Drake came in. Mm-hmm. So that was a bad move. But I don't know what Gruden does with that Raiders team. It's just bonkers. Like you have a guy there you were talking about wanting to get more touches, and you want him to break the records, and then we'll bring in Kenyon Drake and give him 11 million guarantees and just screw the whole thing up. You know what I mean? It just doesn't make sense to me.
No, not at all. So yeah, I agree with the Josh Jacobs pick. I think that'll be very interesting to see what happens with the running backs there. Also, if they're going to incorporate Bryan Edwards into the game at all. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what happens down in Las Vegas.
We'll see.
I'm going to go with my breakout bust. I'm going to go with Brandon Cooks. So it's been interesting to see. So he has been doing phenomenal in PPR leagues, but here's the thing. He played in New Orleans, had a star quarterback, played in New England, star quarterback. LA Raiders, he did play one season that he did have a downfall year, and that's because Jared Goff had a downfall year. Mm-hmm. And then he went to Houston where he had the one and only Deshaun Watson. And if Deshaun Watson does not play, who do they have? Tyrod Taylor? David Mills, or Jeff Driscoll, because we all know Ryan Finley already got cut. So he finished PPR 16, and he had 81 receptions, 1,150 yards, 6 touchdowns. Watson, he could play, he could not play. I don't see Brandon Cooks being that breakout player again and keeping that top PPR league type of player format. So I really think that Brandon Cooks is going to fall, and he's going to be the bust candidate this year.
Yeah, no, I understand like the rationale of of making that selection. It's just, I'll say the one thing that I always think about for where, like with Cooks, is that I'm like the targets will be there. We don't know who's throwing him the ball per se, but the targets, will be there. But I just think the uncertainty at the quarterback position just really kind of lowers like his his ceiling. But he's a guy I'm okay with acquiring in a draft. I'm not reaching for him, but if he's there, it's like why not? Because the targets, the target share will be there and the share of air yards. So, but yeah, I get totally where you're coming from, Fernando.
Yeah, I'm a Cooks fan. I like the talent, but again, I don't know. No, I agree with you. I actually agree with you, Fernando. I just don't know where this Houston Texans team offense in general is going. Until we get some clarity at the quarterback position, I think you'll see the likes of Cooks probably fall later and later in drafts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you guys were both gonna disagree with me, and I was gonna have to wear that wolf hat and have to start giving some howls. But yeah, no, I think Brandon Cooks is definitely gonna be a bust candidate this year. But Eric, I definitely see where you're coming from for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So over to me then for the bust. I think we might go differently here, Eric. I have a feeling. So I'm gonna say Saquon Barkley will bust this year, I'm afraid. So
sorry, I'm leaving.
I'm thinking strictly fantasy with this. Like, I love the guy, love the talent. But if you're telling me that you're taking your RB1, say he's probably going to be somewhere between the first and the fifth pick coming off the board, right?
Yeah.
And he could be eased in gently for the first 5 weeks, 6 weeks. That knee got torn up, ACL, MCL, meniscus. That knee was bad. And if you're thinking from a team perspective, you're like, he's a prized asset. We got to ease him in gently. But if you're 5 weeks in and your RB1 hasn't been doing it, your team could be in trouble come halfway. Mm-hmm. So that's my reason that I think he'll bust. Like, he could be a guy that you might go try and trade for halfway through the fantasy season. But I think if you're going to a draft and you're taking him early, I think you're taking a chance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I could see it, just with, because he has been banged up, the last, like couple of seasons. But it's, I'll say on the flip side, it's just so rare to see like a running back that has, I guess, the opportunity share that Barkley has. If you look at it like on a per game basis, and the Giants are going to want to run the football. They want to run the football, I guess, as they say, establish the run, but then really get the play action passing game going, because that's really what Daniel Jones needs, because they ran the ball a lot last year. They just didn't have Saquon Barkley back there, and it's just, you can't instill fear like in a defense for where he's not back there, and you've got the committee of other guys that they did have. And so that's the only thing where I would be a little bit hesitant on, because even if he is eased in, I think it's just something, if you're drafting him, you just have to be kind of mentally prepared for. But I could easily see with a guy like Barkley, if he does get eased in the first couple of games, I'm like, he's going to be touted as a buy low candidate by so many websites, I'm sure. Yeah. Just thinking about it.
100%. I think people will be knocking on the door of every owner saying, come on, I'll trade you, Yeah. So
exactly. But no, that's a good pick.
Yeah, I do think it's a good pick because of the way he's valued. Mm-hmm. He's just valued so high still, and yet he could be a bust. I mean, the last 2 years he struggled. In one of my leagues that I actually drafted him 1.01 in my dynasty startup, and I sold him recently because of the uncertainty. And just in case he does actually become a bust candidate this year, mm-hmm. his value is going to dramatically tank after this year, because now it's been 3 years with injuries. He could be a nobody now, and he could just end up starting to be a backup. And I think that's kind of why the Giants added a lot of pass catchers, is because if they need to go to pass catching receivers instead of Barkley, if he gets hurt again, I think that was the reason why they really spent all their money.
Yeah, I'll add one thing, because I know we'll have people that are watching and listening for where. Think of it this way. I'll give you an analogy, is that I think we all drive cars, get to one place to another. you're never going to drive the car with looking through the rearview mirror. I'm like, you're always going to look like straight ahead. So people think about with Barkley, they think about, hey, the injury, torn ACL, he's out. But then I would also challenge everyone to think about, guys that have come back, from an ACL injury and like had dominant seasons. I'm like, 3 guys that quickly entered my mind were like Jamal Charles. Everybody remembers that. Todd Gurley, was another one. And who's the third? Adrian Peterson. And Adrian Peterson, the type of seasons, that they had. And so I get it. It's like a risk, but I think it's one, if you gamble, I'm like, it could pay off, because he's a guy that has potential to finish as like the RB1 overall. Yeah. But yeah, I get where everyone's coming from, but then, just kind of looking at it from a opposite angle too. So.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Risk reward type of guy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So Eric, yeah, you can go on and say your second one. You got Josh Jacobs now. Are we going for another running back here?
Yeah, for the bust. Actually, yeah, we are going. We're going to stay with the running back position with me. Now, I thought about mentioning, like Odell Beckham, but I think I've got another name that could surprise people. OBJ is one. Just given how that team performed, like without him, I'm like, does he truly like going to elevate them even higher? But I would say one running back that comes to mind is like Leonard Fournette. I think everyone will be enamored by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're like, hey, they won the Super Bowl. Tom Brady, he changed the dynamic on the team. Playoff Lenny, or I forgot the other nickname. We'll just call him Playoff Lenny. So, Playoff Lenny. Or no. I've got it. Lombardi Lenny. I've heard that one too.
Oh, yep.
Yeah. So everyone's thinking about, yay, Leonard Fournette, it's great. But here's the bottom line. It's like Fournette wouldn't have gotten his opportunity if Ronald Jones didn't get banged up. And hey, he ran with it. Everyone saw what he did, in the postseason. A key contributor on that Super Bowl run. But here's the thing. You've got Ronald Jones that's coming back. He's going to get touches in that backfield. Same thing with Leonard Fournette. Both of those two guys, they're not the most dependable in pass protection. We know about Tom Brady, his extreme competitiveness, and you mess a block, a blown mental error, he will probably throw you under the bus until you get it ingrained into your head, and it won't happen again. And so you've got those two guys that are going to be fighting over like early down like touches. It's going to be like a street fight. They're going to be going at it. But then they got Keyshawn Vaughn that's there too, who's no slouch. I'm like, you look at his collegiate body of work, guy was a stud. He just didn't play that many snaps last year. And so that could change like this year, potentially, according to Bruce Arians, coach speak, right? But then I think the other element that's not talked about enough, very savvy signing, was bringing in Giovanni Bernard.
Yeah.
Very capable pass protector. Very great receiver out of the backfield. And so he's going to get a lot of those third down snaps, a lot of those targets, and really just cannibalize like the backfield, because you've got Ronald Jones and then, Leonard Fournette kind of fighting over those touches. And so I just think that's a guy, when you look at Leonard Fournette's like ADP, he's not a guy that I'm necessarily reaching for. I just rather get like who's left. Like if Ronald Jones is left, like a round or two later, I may roll the dice on him. If it's Leonard Fournette, I may roll the dice on him as well. But it's just not a backfield like I'm aggressively targeting in drafts. So that's kind of everything that leads to me bringing up Leonard Fournette. So
now, before I add on to my Leonard Fournette spiel, in Dynasty, are you drafting Ronald Jones before Leonard Fournette or Leonard Fournette before Ronald Jones?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because both those guys are not too far off, like in age. I'm like, if you gave me a choice, I would end up going like with Leonard Fournette. Again, I'm a big SEC guy. Grew up in Alabama. Lived in Louisiana before coming here to Texas, where I'm currently at. And so, I would go with Leonard Fournette on that, because I've watched him quite a bit like over the years. And he's a really good running back. So I would go, if it was Dynasty, Fournette over Jones.
Interesting. All right. The reason why I ask is yesterday I was on a show with Dave from Dynasty Dorks, and we were talking about potential free agents in the 2022 season. Ronald Jones is in his contract year this year. He's only 23 years old. And I really think that Fournette, them bringing back Fournette, is the insurance option after breaking out in the playoffs last year. Ronald Jones was only 22 yards away from having a 1,000-yard season last year. Shockingly enough. And Fournette just overshadowed that by him breaking out in the playoffs and towards the end of the season. So I'm really I love the bus candidate for Leonard Fournette because I think Ronald Jones is going to be the future running back in in the Buccaneers franchise, and Keyshawn Vaughn is going to be that 1-2 punch. And I think that's what they wanted. Yeah. Keyshawn Vaughn's going to be the 1-2, and he's learning the playbook currently. Fournette is just there as an insurance policy.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting scenario, especially after this season, to see how that pans out. And I think it's kind of one of those situations for where it's just going to have to play out on the field just to see who outproduces, the other. But it may end up being, like to your point, Fernando, it's like the Keyshawn Vaughn may end up being the real victor here because you can get him essentially for free right now. Everyone's like, it's just like Big Trouble in Little China, where it's like Jack Burton. It's like, who? Keyshawn Vaughn.
Yeah.
I love that. Keith, got anything to add on that?
No, I like the call too. I like Leonard Fournette as a bust. I think Ronald Jones is the more talented player. I think Bruce Arians just a bit odd the way he, handles things, especially with running backs. So I think Leonard Fournette's always kind of been the odd man out. What Jacksonville just wanted rid, and he ends up with Tampa Bay and Tom Brady, and kind of got lucky in playoffs. I don't think he's worth much to your fantasy team, really. Like, I get late on in dynasty or something like that, but if you're talking redraft, a plug in here and there maybe for bye weeks or something like that, I don't really think he's much value.
Yeah, and it's crazy to say because I actually loved Leonard Fournette when he got drafted to the Jaguars and he broke out, and I was drafting him constantly. And then just after that injury, he kind of just fell down, and now he's picking up the slack from Ronald Jones, and he's getting the hype over Ronald Jones. So, my next bust candidate, I'm really debating on who I go with. I got two. I'm going to go with Mike Evans, actually. We're going to stay in the Buccaneers franchise. I'm going to go with Mike Evans. Reason why, again, there's too many weapons. And if you see Godwin, he also had the less attention from defenders due to all the additions from Antonio Brown to Rob Gronkowski. And I think that's going to be the big thing. And if you look at all the cornerbacks that Mike Evans was facing last year, in New Orleans, he only scored 7.2 points. Green Bay, 2 points. Back to New Orleans, 10.4 points. The Vikings, 8.6. Atlanta, Las Vegas, they don't have that great of a defense, but you know what? He still got held up to 7.6 points and 5.7 points. This season, he's facing the Rams, the Patriots, the Dolphins, the Bears, New Orleans twice, the Colts, who had a breakout season of a cornerback, Rock Ya-Sin, and Carolina, we could see here and there, and then the Buffalo Bills. So you're potentially having 9 weeks of hard cornerbacks on you. So I don't see Mike Evans as being that top guy in the Buccaneers. I actually really think Chris Godwin is going to be their top guy.
Yeah, I'm never a big Mike Evans fan, especially when it comes to fantasy. I always think he's like touchdown dependent, really. He doesn't get enough targets. The ball doesn't come his way enough. Like I would go for Chris Godwin all the time, just for that guy. He's going to be targeted. He's going to get the receptions. That's who I go. And then, when it comes to Tom Brady goes for his big guys in the red zone and targets Mike Evans. And that's where, he might save your day, he might save your fancy day, but he's never a guy I'm interested in going for.
Yeah, they're definitely touchdown dependent. I'm like, he had, I believe it was a career low 109 targets last year. And so it's just so many mouths to feed. Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin. And so I just think if I'm going to target like Evans, again, it's not a guy that I'm reaching for. I'm viewing him as solely like a wide receiver 2. And that's ultimately going to be like his ceiling. I wouldn't expect wide receiver 1 production from a guy like Evans. But again, not a guy that I'm aggressively targeting. I'd rather just wait later to get Antonio Brown, to be candid.
Yeah. I think Mike Evans' ADP is probably too high as well to go anywhere near him.
100%. Yeah. I'm staying away from all the Buccaneers.
Yeah. So moving on to me then for my bust. So I'll go wide receiver. I'll go DJ Shark. I think the shark time is over, and it sounds like Urban Meyer doesn't fancy him either. His last 24 games, he only found inside the top 24 wide receiver 4 times. I do think he's a talented guy, but I just don't think he's going to be fancied there. As we were saying, coach talk is that Urban Meyer doesn't really like him. Wants him to put on weight, and it sounds like he has, but. If Urban Meyer is a new coach coming in and he's actively saying that you need to put on a bit of weight there, you're a big guy playing small. I'm not a big fan. I think you got to read between the lines there and say, yeah, you might be done there in Jacksonville.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can see that 100%. We were actually talking yesterday on Dynasty Dork's show, and we were actually saying how we think he might be traded because of the Marvin Jones addition, and you also have a big tough guy, Colin Johnson, there. So it'll be intriguing to see who does anyone move there, who's going to be the top guy. I mean, we know Laviska Shenault's been impressing in the offseason to the coaches, so who knows? Maybe Shenault's going to be the top guy there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so before we move on to sleepers, I just want to quickly point out Taysom Hill as a possible bust candidate. So he only started 4 games during his whole NFL career. His 4 games, 24.22 points, 17.52 points, 22.28 points, 22.58 points, 19.94 points. So he did pretty decent, but he had a 75% completion rate. But here's the problem. He threw 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions in his career. You got Jameis Winston there. Jameis Winston has had 5,000-yard season, 4,000-yard season. He can throw. Here's the problem. His interceptions, the turnover rate. But you know what? In fantasy, I mean, Jameis Winston was a top guy in fantasy, even though with his 30 interceptions. Basically, his touchdowns and passing yards and rushing ability kind of just offset that 30 interceptions. So I really think that Taysom Hill is going to be a bust candidate only because he doesn't have that much experience in the QB role. But that was my quick addition. I just had to point that out because I've been doing a lot of research on Taysom Hill. I've been thinking of if I should buy him or not, and I think right now his price is way too high.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think people are holding on, thinking he's probably going to be the starter, and with his, Russian value as well, I think people are going to overvalue that as well. Thinking he's going to probably take some touchdowns off Kamara. But yeah, he's got the making of a bust because you've got Jameis Winston waiting on the sidelines there. If things start going wrong, he can just be slotted in. If he's the starter, it could be Winston.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going on to our sleeper candidates now, I'm going to go first. For everyone who knows, I've been on this big train for the sleeper. Keith knows, he's already laughing. Get ready for the big spiel. It's Lynn Bowden. He's a sleeper. Everyone needs to get him. He has to get him. So here's the reason. He scored over 10 points the last 3 of the 4 games last season. 11 of the 16 games for Will Fuller. He's had in the last 2 seasons, in his whole career, 53 out of 80 games. That's about 66% in the last 5 years. And so he faces a lot of injuries, and with that new game added to the season, that could also add on to an injury. Devontae Parker, 14 out of 16 games last season, 40 in PPR leagues he ranked. He played 1 full season in his career. And that 1 full season is where he ranked 11 in PPR leagues, and that was back in 2019. After that, he has not finished inside the 40 in his career. Next one, Preston Williams, 16 out of 32 games played in the last 2 seasons, 8 games his rookie season, 8 games last year, and he's never had a better PPR finish than 79. Jalen Waddle, their new addition, their rookie. If you look back in college, he suffered a high ankle sprain and a right ankle fracture. He only played 6 games last year. He's coming into a new league, new system, new everything. This man could not be it for Miami. But you know who is it? It's Lynn Bowden. Lynn Bowden is the guy. I'm telling you right now. For everyone, if Lynn Bowden goes off, Don't tell me that I didn't warn you.
That means Eric, go buy Lynn Bowden now.
That's what it sounds like. Go get him. Go get him. Wow. All right, who's up? Who's gonna go?
Well, you go on. I'm interested to see you go.
All right. I'll go. So I can promise everyone, hey, it's not Lynn Bowden. Nothing against Lynn Bowden, but it's not Lynn Bowden. So I would say sleeper for me would be Javonte Williams, but I know he's really been gaining a lot of attention here lately. But you're looking at a guy that has a legitimate chance to finish as the RB1 in the Broncos backfield. Love his film, from the University of North Carolina. Dominant final season. It's like Javonte Williams and Michael Carter were essentially like the Smash Brothers, if you want to have like a Mighty Ducks reference. So like these guys just steamrolled people, and I loved it. I would have loved like blocking for them. He's an ex-offensive lineman, but you look at Williams. 157 rushing attempts, 1,140 yards, 19 touchdowns. Phenomenal. 27 rushing attempts of 15 or more yards. Guy was very viable as a receiver out of the backfield too. 25 receptions, 305 yards. 3 touchdowns. Lands in a great situation like in Denver. We were talking about Philip Lindsay earlier. So we've got 127 unaccounted rushing attempts there for the taking. Melvin Gordon entering the contract year, obviously getting up there in age. One thing that I noticed with Williams' addition, if you look at his skill set relative to Melvin Gordon, it's eerily similar. So this is going to do a couple of things. For one, it's going to allow, Pat Shurmur to not kind of broadcast to opposing defenses on what's going on with the play calling where one of these guys is in the game, because they can essentially do the same thing. And so that's another good thing. I would say that the second reason with that, which makes it intriguing, is because, Gordon's entering a contract year. He's essentially going to be in a committee with his replacement in Williams, for 2021. But also, too, they got the best offensive line coach in the game, in my opinion, in Mike Munchak. That acquisition, whenever he landed in Denver, didn't get the attention that it deserved. They also have even more continuity now, like on the offensive line going into this season, which really gets me excited. So to bring all that together for those that are watching or listening, you've got Williams, who's a very solid like RB3. I believe that's going to be your floor, but I think his ceiling is going to be like a high-end RB2. So that's a guy I recommend you aggressively target in drafts at his ADP. Who knows? We can get to August and it could steadily climb, but he's really a great value right now.
Yeah, I love that. I love that pick. Javonte Williams has been said that he's going to be possibly a top guy. So yeah. I'm intrigued. I think that's who my sleeper pick would also be. Out of all the running backs this season, we already know Najee could be a breakout. But I really like the Javonte Williams pick.
I love that call. I had him on my list there. You got done before me, Eric. I think he's going to take that role over. I think Melvin Gordon probably is he facing a suspension for the DUI thing. So
yeah, good point.
Javonte Williams, if he slots in there early, Melvin might not get back in.
Not at all.
So I'm going wide receiver with mine. I'm going Henry Ruggs. So didn't have a great season last year, but one big factor is Nelson Aguilar's gone. I know they brought John Brown in, but I like John Brown, don't get me wrong, but he's going to get hurt at some stage. It's what he does. And I think if he can get on the same page with Carr early, Carr is a very good deep thrower. I'm not a whole lover of Carr, but he's good at a deep ball. And I think if they can get on the same page early, Henry Ruggs could be a good play this year. I think he's probably one you can probably buy low on. I think there's a lot of people who are out on Ruggs after a bad season. I haven't heard too many people talk about him other than being a sleeper. You know what I mean? I don't think anybody's been going crazy thinking, it's going to be his year and pushing up the price on him. So I think he could be a nice sleeper that might get a good return on value for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. He definitely, his ADP definitely dropped, and a lot of people really just fell off on him. And he kind of reminds me of John Ross, which is the problem. Because of the speed, he doesn't get to really get anything, any value, because it's the speed that really has been the factor for John Ross. And Henry Ruggs was that big thing of, oh, his speed's going to be great. He's going to be like a Tyreek Hill. I don't know yet. I don't know if Henry Ruggs is going to be that guy yet, but that's why I like him as a sleeper, because I don't think he has a big chance to break out, but he's got a better chance of being that sleeper pick.
Yep.
Eric, we can go back to you actually for your last sleeper.
I'll gladly throw another name out there. So I'll say Jamal Williams, one guy that I love quite a bit. Been very productive, like in a supporting role, like with the Packers. Give you another statistical nugget out there. Oh, what did I miss there? Had some weird audio. I thought it was like, I'm like, are you putting a musical cue in there for me?
I heard it too, but it was kind of just perfect. It just went in.
Yeah, I was just like, what? No, but anyway, all right, I digress. Back to it. So Jamal Williams, statistical nugget. So first player in Packers history. This guy rattled off, 450 or more rushing yards and 200 or more receiving yards in each of his first 4 seasons. And so, again, he's just been really productive, like in that supporting role. Like he's finished like as a running back 3 or RB3 or better in PPR formats in nearly like 70% of those games, like 11 like RB1 finishes too. One thing with the Lions backfield, I know once they did sign like Williams, because everyone, big DeAndre Swift, fanatics or stands, whatever you want to use them, but they were just like, yeah, it's going to be great. We get rid of all these people in the backfield. This guy's going to be a workhorse. Yeah, it's going to be great. And then they like signed Jamal Williams. They're just like, oh,
what's going wrong?
yeah, like what's going wrong here? And so here's my belief. It's like this backfield's going to be like a 50-50 split. Jared Goff, I know we mentioned him briefly like earlier. I'm like, for him to be successful, I'm like, you really need to lean heavily like on the running game. But then you look at their new offensive coordinator, like Anthony Lynn. I'm like, this is a guy in his 4 years with the Chargers that schemed 26% of passes and 41% of touches to running backs during that time frame. And so, the bottom line, Swift is not going to be used as a bell cow. Jamal Williams will get his touches, and it's just a scenario. Are you gonna go with like the name brand in DeAndre Swift? Or are you going to go with the Great Value or Kroger brand that's essentially the same thing and Jamal Williams a little bit later? And again, I'm always looking for discounts. I'm going to get the cheaper guy. And so that's why I like Jamal Williams.
Yeah, no, that was great. I love how you compared it to a Great Value brand and discounted price. No, I love that pick because you can get so many backup running backs that are now being used as split carries. And like we saw in Green Bay, Aaron Jones, he did phenomenal. Jamal Williams also did phenomenal. Exactly. Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray. I mean, it's been done before and it can happen again. And I agree with you with DeAndre Swift not being a bell cow. He also did face an injury last year, which could have been that impact to sign Jamal Williams. So I'll be intrigued to see how Jamal Williams can incorporate his run game in Detroit.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that one too. I don't really have much to add. I think you guys covered it all, but he showed what he can do with limited touches with the Packers. I think if he's just as effective with Detroit, he'll be a nice one to get late on.
Yeah, I've got some other names real quick just before we wrap up. If you just want me to rattle them off real quick with like a one nugget or two. So I'll say another guy. If you're looking for a quarterback, Joe Burrow. 4 QB1 performances last year in 10 games, 5 300-yard passing games. Did make some adjustments to the offensive line, so hopefully we'll get better protection. Everyone loves the weapons and are very familiar with the weapons that are there. I think another guy that's really dirt cheap, wide receiver Devontae Smith. I'm like, he could see like 120 or more targets. Everyone knows about his route running ability, and like his skill set translates very well to the NFL. Again, this is a guy that can hurt you on screens. He can hurt you deep. He can hurt you over the middle. They're going to use him a lot. Another name that's essentially free, and I'll kind of close it out on this guy, is going back to that Lions offense, is like Tyrell Williams, the forgotten guy. Everyone's like TJ Hawkinson. Don't forget about Tyrell Williams. I'm like, they signed this guy. He's got some continuity with Anthony Lynn. They've got history together. I'm like, if you look at Williams, I'm like, he finishes a wide receiver 3 or better in 78% of his games in PPR from 2017 to 2018. I'm like, the Lions, I'm like, they need people to throw the ball to. They've got 360 available targets. one nugget with Williams is that he averaged like 13 air yards per target. So I'm like, he will get targeted deep. And again, for those that are watching, I'm like, this is a guy that's essentially free in drafts. There you go. You need targets, need wide receiver help. Boom, Tyrell Williams is right there for you.
Yeah, great sleeper pick to grab at the end of the draft. That's just great to grab. I mean, I love grabbing those values at the very end of the draft and being those top dogs at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Williams is just a player that's just not going to kill you. You know, you'll get him for nothing. And yeah, if he doesn't work out, so what? But if he does, your quid's in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yep. Quickly for my sleeper pick is Jacoby Myers, and that's because he finished 53 in PPR leagues. Shockingly enough, he had 59 receptions, 729 yards last year, 0 touchdowns, which kind of surprised me. Yes, they added Bourne. Yes, they added Aguilar, Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry. I mean, they added great receivers, but here's the problem. New England's system is very hard to learn, and that's the advantage Jacoby Myers has. And he's actually been standing out of everyone in the offseason, which I think he is going to help, and I think he can be that top wideout at the start of the season.
Yep. I like that call. I actually had him down as well. You robbed him for me.
My bad. We robbed one of your guys.
It's all good. Eric. I'll go with my last one quick, I suppose, before we wrap up. I'll go to tight end. I'll go with Gerald Everett, going to the Seahawks.
That's a good one.
I think it's a guy. I think it's a guy that he's very athletic. Has talent. There was obviously too much mouths to feed. You know, you had Tyler Higbee. You got Woods, Cup, Gurley when he was in his good days. Obviously, it's gone to, Cam Akers and all that now. But the Seahawks actively went out to get him. And Russ has been kind of known to target his tight ends when he comes to the red zone. Like, if it's not Tyler Lockett, he looks for, like, he had Jacob Hollister there. There was Greg Olsen. And I think if Gerald Everett, he's only there on a 1-year deal, but if he can just shine a little bit through this season, he could get a deal there with Seattle, and we could see the best of Gerald Everett.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great pick. Great pick right there. I've actually been trying to buy him in a couple leagues.
Yeah, I don't think he's that expensive. I don't think people are thinking he's all in there. I think you can get him cheap. And like a bit like Tyrell Williams, you could be getting something there for nothing practically.
Yeah, cheap. So to run it through, sleeper candidates that we had, Keith had Henry Ruggs, Gerald Everett. Eric had Javonte Williams, Jamal Williams. You had both Williams there. I had Lynn Bowden and Jacoby Myers. Thank you, Keith. Co-host Keith, everyone. Swamp Donkey _90. Make sure to follow him. I was also joined by our great guest star from Pro Football Network, Eric N. Moody. You can follow him at Eric N. Moody. It's been great. It's been a pleasure to have you guys. Once again, my name is Fernando, and I am the host of Sports Time HQ. And we'll be back next week on Thursday.
Mm-hmm.